More now on our top story as Michael Gove prepares to discuss the Christmas coronavirus rules with leaders of the devolved nations. As we count down to Christmas, cases are rising fast in parts of the southeast. London, as well as most of Essex and parts of Hertfordshire, will go into Tier 3 from midnight tonight. So with greater restrictions being imposed, is it right that the rules are relaxed over Christmas? Policy and strategy analytics expert at Loughborough's University School of Business and Economics, Dr. Duncan Robertson, joins us this afternoon. Dr. Robertson, thanks very much. Good to see you again. So let's have a look at the numbers that have led to London and parts of the southeast going into Tier 3. What are they showing us?
Well, the numbers are really rising quite significantly, and they actually started rising just before the end of this second lockdown, and they've been rising very quickly since. So if you look at the graph, particularly of London, you'll see that it started, this is across the entire epidemic. So the first phase is the first wave, but of course we weren't catching as many cases then, we weren't detecting as many. And then we move into the second phase. You'll see it goes down, and then right at the end, it's going up very, very quickly. And this is essentially giving a real warning signal to government to say that things are starting to get out of control in London and something needs to be done fairly urgently.
What does it do, though, when you're seeing case numbers rising during lockdown rather than after restrictions are released?
Well, it says something about the state of the lockdown. So, of course, all through this, we've had different objectives. So the government hasn't just been about trying to minimise the number of deaths. It's had other objectives, and these are very, sensible objectives too. For example, keeping schools open. But of course, as young people mix, they will tend to spread the virus. And the problem is that this will potentially, in some areas, mean that the number of children getting cases actually increases too.
Yeah, in terms of the numbers of children getting the virus, because we've had a lot of talk around schools and particularly secondary schools and whether they should indeed be closed for the last few days of term. What do they look like?
Well, there's a heat map that is on the screen, and what it's basically showing, with these heat maps, you go from left to right across the weeks and from the bottom to the top according to ages. And in the mid, and this is for the second phase. So this is sort of the end, beginning of August, right up until a few days ago. And we saw that second phase in the middle there. But what is really striking with this chart in the bottom right there, third up from the bottom, is you see cases in the 10 to 19-year-olds are really getting very high. And I think this has come as a shock to the government, and it's basically showing that actually cases between 10 and 19-year-olds in London are very high. And this is before the extra testing that was announced for London. So you may detect more in the future, but certainly this graph is showing before the extra testing. And this is exactly the demographic that you don't want to be mixing with elderly or vulnerable people, for example, over the Christmas period.
What about England as a whole, then? Are we seeing a similar picture in the spread of infections?
Well, we're not quite seeing it to the same extent in London because, of course, this averages out the entire country. So some are going to be coming down, some are going to be going up. So we're not really seeing the same effect overall. But next week, I think we'll see, the third wave starting to hit. So this is really, the second wave was clearly going down nationally, and we're just at this sort of tipping point where potentially it's starting to get out of control again. And that's why the government has to act.
Yeah, and you say next week, the third wave starting to hit right as we move into the Christmas period and potentially families getting together.
Well, exactly. And this is this is very dangerous. And of course, the British Medical Journal and the Health Service Journal have come out today with a joint editorial basically warning that as well as the risks of, young people who are obviously a source of infection, especially within London, if they start mixing with their grandparents, there's going to be, a spread there. And so, it's not very helpful to hear stories and the rhetoric of, tier zero over Christmas, because of course it isn't tier zero, but there will be mixing unless the government stops it. And this is a very difficult stage because, of course, at the moment, unlike the second phase, where there were about 450 people in hospital, now we've got about 15,000. And that's a huge base pressure. Then these are COVID patients in hospital. And of course, this is a huge base load, if you like, on the health service when it's going into its busiest period regardless. So it's going to get, the general numbers of people coming into hospital due to winter, plus potentially a renewed pressure from people mixing over Christmas. So it's a very dangerous time.
Dr. Duncan Robertson, thanks very much. Good to get your analysis as always.